I took the job at the Regional Transit Authority because it was quiet. That's what they told me in the interview, and that's what it was. Quiet. The records management office sat on the third floor of an administrative building about 2 blocks from the main rail depot, in a part of the city most people only passed through on the expressway. The windows faced a parking lot. The carpet was the color of old putty. The fluorescent lights had a faint, irregular flicker that I stopped noticing after the first week. My job was digitization. That's it. The RTA had decades of paper records, inspection reports, maintenance logs, incident forms, equipment inventories, personnel files, all boxed and labeled in a storage room that ran the length of the building's east side. The agency had received a grant to convert everything to digital, and they'd hired 4 of us to do it. We each had a desk, a scanner, and a database entry terminal. We were told to work alphabetically by tunnel section. I was assigned tunnels 5 through 9. Most of the records were exactly what you'd expect. Inspection dates, equipment serial numbers, notes about drainage, ventilation, lighting, track wear. The language was dry and repetitive. A typical entry might read, routine inspection completed. Section 5C, markers 12 through 18. No anomalies observed. Ventilation within normal parameters. Drainage grade at marker 15 showing minor corrosion. Flagged for replacement. Page after page of that. Hundreds of pages. Thousands. I didn't mind it. I'd scan each page, enter the metadata, date, section, inspector name, category, and file the original back in the box. Some days I'd process 60 or 70 pages. Some days I'd barely manage 40, depending on the handwriting or the condition of the paper. A few of the older logs were water damaged. The ink bled out into soft blue halos, and I'd have to type out what I could read and mark the rest as illegible. I was about 3 weeks in when I reached the Tunnel 7 boxes. There were 11 of them, which was more than any other tunnel section. Tunnels 5 and 6 had 4 boxes each. Tunnel 8 had 5. Tunnel 7 had 11, and the last 3 were sealed with packing tape that had been layered over itself so many times it had gone stiff and amber-colored, like old varnish. The labels on those 3 boxes were handwritten, not printed, and the handwriting was small and careful. They read, T7, supplemental, do not circulate. I asked Priya, the woman who'd been at the RTA longest. She'd been doing administrative work there for almost 9 years, whether she knew what the supplemental logs were. She glanced at the box I was holding and shook her head. I've never gone through the Tunnel 7 stuff, she said. Rick used to handle those sections before he left. I think he skipped some of it. Skipped it? He said something about the dates not lining up. I don't remember. You could ask Ellison. Ellison was our supervisor, though he was rarely in the office. He managed 2 other departments and seemed to treat records management as something that ran itself. When I emailed him about the supplemental boxes, he replied the next day, go ahead and digitize everything in your section. If it's in the box, it needs to be scanned. That was it. No mention of the do not circulate label. No further context, so I opened them. The first of the 3 supplemental boxes contained maintenance logs from 1996 through 2004. Standard format, mostly. But the entries were longer than normal. Where a routine inspection for another tunnel might take up half a page, the Tunnel 7 logs often ran 2 or 3 pages per visit. The inspectors, there were several rotating, wrote with unusual detail. They noted temperatures at specific markers. They recorded the exact times they entered and exited the tunnel. One of them, a man named Hargrove, consistently noted the ambient sound profile, a term I hadn't seen in any other log. His entry from March 14, 1998 read, entered T7 at 06.40, ambient sound profile, standard low-frequency resonance consistent with ventilation system, intermittent drip near marker 22, no audible mechanical disturbance, temperature at marker 1, 58 degrees F, temperature at marker 14, 54 degrees F, temperature at marker 27, 51 degrees F, temperature at marker 41, 47 degrees F. Nut. Gradient continues to exceed predicted thermal model. Submitted revised temperature report to engineering. No response to previous 3 submissions. That last line caught my attention. Not because it was alarming, but because of the tone. It was the kind of note someone writes when they've been ignored and want it on record. I kept scanning. Hargrove's entries from the rest of that year repeated the temperature concerns several more times. The gradient, the progressive cooling as you move deeper into Tunnel 7, was apparently steeper than it should have been based on the tunnel's depth, length, and ventilation specs. He kept noting it. Engineering kept not responding, or at least there was no record of any response in the logs. By 1999, the temperature discrepancy had gotten worse. Hargrove recorded a reading of 38 degrees F at marker 41 in July. The surface temperature that day, according to his own note, was 91 degrees F. The tunnel was over 50 degrees cooler at its deepest point than the air above ground. He wrote, "This reading is not consistent with any known thermal behavior of this tunnel section. Requesting formal engineering review. Requesting instrumentation check. Third request this quarter." Nobody responded. Or if they did, it wasn't in the logs. Around this same period, the entries began to include a new detail. Several inspectors, not just Hargrove, started noting the length of their inspections. Not just entry and exit times, but their subjective experience of duration. Hargrove's entry from October 2, 1999 read, "Total inspection time per clock, 2 hours 14 minutes. Perceived duration, significantly longer. Personal note, this is the 3rd consecutive inspection where elapsed time has felt inconsistent with clock reading. I am not the only one who has reported this. I remember reading that and pausing, not because I believed something supernatural was happening in a transit tunnel. I paused because of the way he wrote it. It was so measured, so careful. He wasn't telling a story. He was documenting something he didn't understand, and he was doing it the only way he knew how, by putting it in the log. I scanned the rest of the 1999 entries. The temperature anomaly continued. The time perception notes continued. And then, starting in November, a new element appeared. Marker 29. Paint discoloration noted on east wall. Approx. 4 FTX 6 FT area. Discoloration is not consistent with water damage, chemical exposure, or age-related degradation. Surface is dry. Paint is intact but has changed color from standard gray, RAL 7035, to a darker shade that does not match any authorized RTA color code. Photographed. Photos attached. There were no photos in the box. I checked. The entry referenced an attachment, but there was nothing clipped, stapled, or inserted with the page. I checked the other boxes, thinking maybe the photos had been misfiled. They hadn't, or if they had, I couldn't find them. The discoloration was mentioned again 2 weeks later, by a different inspector. This time it was larger. The entry noted that the affected area now measured approximately 8 by 12 feet, and that the color had deepened further. The inspector, a woman named Cardenas, wrote, "Discoloration does not respond to cleaning. Surface texture unchanged. No odor, no moisture. Recommended repainting. Awaiting approval." In December, Hargrove noted that the discoloration had appeared at a second location near marker 36. Same characteristics. Dry surface, intact paint, unexplained color change. He also noted, and this is the entry I've thought about more than any other, that the shape of the discolored area at marker 29 had changed since his last inspection. He wrote, "Previous outline was roughly rectangular. Current outline is irregular. Edges are not consistent with previous measurements. This may indicate progressive spread, but the pattern of spread is not radial or linear. It is difficult to describe the current shape. I have measured and sketched it. See attached." Again, no attachment. I went through the year 2000 entries in a kind of focused trance. The details accumulated. The cold deepened. The discolored patches multiplied. 3, then 5, then 8 locations along the tunnel walls. One inspector noted that the patches were no longer just on the walls. One had appeared on the ceiling near marker 33, another on the floor at marker 38. They were always dry. Always the same wrong color that didn't match any paint code. Always slightly different in shape from the last time they'd been measured. In March 2000, Cardenas filed a formal anomaly report. I found the form in the second supplemental box, requesting a full engineering and environmental assessment of Tunnel 7. The form had a space for supervisor response. The space was blank. Below it, stamped in faded red ink, was a single word: received. Nothing else. No follow-up report. No assessment. No work order. Just received. Around this time, I noticed that the inspector rotation for Tunnel 7 had changed. In the late 90s, there had been 4 or 5 inspectors regularly assigned. By mid-2000, it was down to 2, Hargrove and Cardenas. By the end of 2000, Cardenas stopped appearing in the logs entirely. Her last entry was unremarkable. A routine inspection, temperatures recorded, discoloration noted at 11 locations, then nothing. I checked the personnel files I'd already scanned. Cardenas had been employed by the RTA from 1994 to 2001. There was a separation form dated February 2001 with the reason listed as voluntary resignation. No exit interview, no forwarding address. Hargrove continued alone. His entries from 2001 are the longest in the entire collection. Some run 4 or 5 pages. He was meticulous. He recorded everything. Temperatures at every 5th marker, sound levels, air quality readings, the dimensions and locations of every discolored area. He sketched maps. He cross-referenced his own previous entries. He noted discrepancies. And there were discrepancies. On April 7, 2001, he wrote, Tunnel 7 total length per RTA engineering documents, 340 meters. Measured distance from portal to terminal wall using calibrated wheel, 412 meters. Discrepancy, 72 meters. This is the 4th measurement I have taken. Results have been consistent within a margin of +/3 meters. The tunnel is longer than its documented length. He reported this to engineering. There was no response in the logs. On May 19, 2001, measured distance, 426 meters. Previous measurement, April 7. 412 meters. Increase, 14 meters. I have measured twice today to confirm. The tunnel is longer than it was 5 weeks ago. I sat at my desk and read that line several times. I understood what he was claiming. I didn't believe it, obviously. Tunnels don't grow. But the precision of his documentation made it difficult to dismiss as error or delusion. He was using calibrated equipment. He was recording his methodology. He was noting his own uncertainty. He wrote, I am aware that this finding is difficult to accept. I have considered equipment malfunction, measurement error, and personal bias. I have used 2 different measuring devices and walked the full length on 3 separate occasions. The readings are consistent. Nobody answered him. Not in the logs, anyway. Through the rest of 2001, the measurements continued to increase. 440 meters. 453. 471. The temperature at the deepest point dropped below freezing. The discolored patches had spread to cover. By Hargrove's estimate, roughly 40% of the visible wall surface beyond marker 30. He described the color as a gray so dark it approaches absence. I didn't know what he meant by that. I still don't, entirely, but it unsettled me when I read it. He also began noting something about echoes. In July 2001, sound behavior beyond marker 35 is inconsistent with tunnel geometry. Echoes return at intervals that do not correspond to the distance to the terminal wall. In some cases, echoes appear to return from a greater distance than the wall should allow. In 2 instances today, I produced a test sound, hand clap, and received no echo at all. And at marker 40, I stopped and stood in silence for approximately 4 minutes. During this period, I heard what I can only describe as a very low, sustained tone. It was at the edge of audibility. It did not fluctuate. It did not appear to come from the ventilation system. When I moved to marker 38, I could no longer hear it. When I returned to marker 40, it was present again. In September 2001, the entries changed. Not in content, in frequency. Hargrove, who had been filing weekly reports for over 3 years, suddenly filed 3 reports in a single week, then 2, the next week, then nothing for 3 weeks, then a single entry, shorter than any he'd written in months. That entry read, "Inspection completed. No anomalies observed. After 3 years of exhaustive documentation, temperature gradients, measurements, discoloration maps, sound observations, and unanswered requests, no anomalies observed." There were 4 more entries after that. All of them were nearly identical. All said some version of routine inspection completed. All systems within normal parameters. They were short. They were empty. They read like they'd been written by a different person. Hargrove's last entry in the Tunnel 7 logs was dated November 3, 2001. After that, the maintenance logs for Tunnel 7 simply stopped, not transitioned to another inspector, not concluded with a final report. They just stopped. I looked for Hargrove in the personnel files. His employment record showed continuous service from 1991 to 2004. He didn't leave after his last Tunnel 7 entry. He kept working at the RTA for 3 more years. But he was never assigned to Tunnel 7 again. His subsequent inspection reports were for Tunnels 2 and 3. Short, routine, unremarkable. The kind of entries I'd scanned hundreds of without pausing. I checked the Tunnel 7 maintenance schedule in the general records. After November 2001, inspections of Tunnel 7 were listed as deferred. A status deferred, a status deferred, a status deferred, a status deferred. The deferral was renewed quarterly. Every 3 months, someone in the system marked the inspection as deferred and moved on. This continued through 2002, through 2003, through 2004, into 2005. I found deferral notices as recent as 2011. 10 years of skipped inspections, each one signed off with a single checkbox and a date. The third supplemental box was the smallest. It contained maybe 30 pages. Most of them were internal memos. Short, bureaucratic, almost aggressively bland. One, dated June 2002, was from the engineering department to the maintenance division. It read, "Per Directive 2002-0041, all supplemental documentation related to Tunnel 7 maintenance activities is to be consolidated and archived separately from standard operational records. These materials are for internal reference only and should not be included in any external audit, public records request, or digitization project." I read that memo 3 times. Then I looked at the box I'd taken it from. The box labeled, "Do not circulate." The box I'd been told to digitize by a supervisor who either didn't know about the directive or didn't care. I scanned the memo. I entered it into the database. I don't know why. It felt like the right thing to do. Or maybe it felt like the only thing I could do. The remaining pages in the third box were mostly duplicates of documents I'd already scanned. Hargrove's temperature reports, Cardenas's anomaly form, a few inspection entries. But at the bottom of the box, beneath everything else, there was a single sheet of paper that was different from all the others. It wasn't a form. It wasn't a log entry. It wasn't a memo. It was a plain sheet of white paper, copier paper, the kind you'd find in any office. On it, someone had drawn a diagram. It was done in pencil, carefully, with a ruler. It showed a simple cross-section of a tunnel, an arch shape, the way a child might draw a tunnel, but precise. Inside the arch, there were markings, small vertical lines spaced evenly along the bottom, which I assumed were the distance markers. They were numbered, and the numbers went up to 41, which was correct for Tunnel 7. But the diagram continued past marker 41. The lines kept going. 42, 43, 44, 45. All the way to 58. Past the end of the tunnel. Past the terminal wall. Into space that, according to every engineering document on file, did not exist. And at marker 53, there was a small circle drawn in the center of the tunnel floor. Inside the circle, in tiny, careful handwriting, someone had written a single word. I won't write what the word was. I've thought about it a great deal, and I don't think writing it down would help anyone understand what I found in those boxes. It wasn't a name. It wasn't a warning. It was an ordinary English word, the kind you might use in a sentence without thinking about it. But in that context, on that diagram, in that circle, at a point inside a tunnel that should not have existed, it was the most disturbing thing I'd ever read. I put the diagram back in the box. I did not scan it. I did not enter it into the database. That was a Thursday. I went home, made dinner, watched something on television that I don't remember, and went to bed. I didn't sleep well. Not because of nightmares. I didn't dream at all. I just couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and listened to the sounds of my apartment, and everything sounded slightly wrong. The refrigerator's hum was too low. The settling of the building was too rhythmic. The silence between sounds was too long. I went back to work the next morning. I moved on to Tunnel 8. I scanned pages. I entered metadata. I didn't open the Tunnel 7 boxes again. But here's the thing, and this is why I'm writing this, I think. 2 weeks after I finished with the Tunnel 7 records, I was in the break room, and I overheard Priya on the phone. She was speaking quietly, almost whispering, and I only caught a fragment. She said, "No, they haven't used it since, I don't know, early 2000s. It's been deferred every quarter. I don't know why." A pause. Then, I know. But nobody's going to authorize it now." She hung up. She looked at me. Not with alarm, exactly. More like she was measuring something. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," she said. "Just scheduling stuff." I nodded. I went back to my desk. That afternoon, I checked the RTA's public operations database, the one available on their website, not the internal system. I looked up Tunnel 7. According to the public records, Tunnel 7 was listed as active with a status of operational, reduced service. Trains still ran through it. Whatever Hargrove had measured, whatever he'd heard, whatever he'd seen spreading across the walls in a color that wasn't in any paint code, trains still passed through that tunnel every day. I looked at the service schedule. Trains ran through Tunnel 7 between 5:00 a.m. and 11:00 p.m. Standard frequency during peak hours, reduced frequency off-peak. It was, by every public metric, a functioning piece of transit infrastructure. But it hadn't been inspected in over a decade. I don't know what I expected to do with this information. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an investigator. I'm a records clerk. I scan documents and enter metadata into a database. That's my job. That's all it was supposed to be. But I started paying attention to things. Small things. I noticed that the storage room where the boxes were kept was slightly colder than the rest of the office. I'd noticed this before, vaguely, the way you notice that one room in a building is always a little cooler than the others. But after the Tunnel 7 logs, I noticed it differently. I brought a thermometer from home one morning and checked. The main office was 72 degrees F. The storage room was 64 degrees F. The far corner where the Tunnel 7 boxes were stacked was 61 degrees F. That's not unusual. Storage rooms are often cooler. Poor insulation, fewer vents, concrete walls. I told myself that. I tell myself that now. But I also noticed that the fluorescent light above the Tunnel 7 boxes flickered in a way that was different from the other lights. The other lights flickered randomly. A quick pulse every few minutes. The kind of thing you stop seeing after a day or two. The light above those boxes flickered at what seemed like a regular interval. I timed it once, with my phone, every 41 seconds. I timed it again the next day. Every 41 seconds. 41. The number of markers in Tunnel 7. I know how that sounds. I know it's the kind of connection that means nothing. The kind of pattern a mind creates when it's looking for patterns. I told myself that. I told myself that the light was on a dying ballast, and ballasts flicker at whatever rate they flicker, and the number 41 has no significance beyond being the number I was thinking about. But I stopped going into the storage room after that. I finished my section, Tunnels 5 through 9, by the end of my second month. Ellison sent a brief email thanking the team for our progress. He mentioned that the digitization project would continue into the next fiscal year with a new batch of records. He did not mention Tunnel 7. He did not ask about the supplemental boxes. He did not ask about the directive that said those records should not be digitized. I thought about replying to his email. I thought about attaching the memo, the directive, and asking him whether he'd known. I thought about describing what I'd found in the logs. I thought about Hargrove's measurements, the growing distance, the wrong color, the sound at marker 40, the diagram with the word I won't write down. I didn't send anything. I don't think it would have mattered. On my last week at the RTA, I did one thing I probably shouldn't have. I left the office during lunch, walked to the nearest station that used Tunnel 7, and stood on the platform. I watched a train come out of the tunnel. It was a perfectly ordinary train. It arrived on time. The doors opened. People got off. People got on. The doors closed. The train pulled away. But before it arrived, in the 30 seconds or so when I could see into the tunnel mouth, I listened. The station was noisy. Announcements, footsteps, the hiss of brakes on the adjacent track. I couldn't hear much, but I thought just for a moment that I heard something very low and very steady coming from inside the tunnel. At the edge of audibility, a tone that didn't fluctuate. The train came, and I couldn't hear it anymore. I finished my contract. I returned my badge. I went home. I applied for other jobs. I got one, eventually, at a different agency, doing different work, normal work, filing, data entry. The kind of work that doesn't require you to open boxes that were sealed shut and labeled with a warning. That was almost 8 months ago. I haven't been back to the RTA building. I haven't looked up the Tunnel 7 service schedule. I haven't thought about Hargrove or Cardenas or the memo that said those records should never have been part of any digitization project. Except, that's not true. I have thought about it. I've thought about it almost every day. And 3 weeks ago, something happened that I can't explain, and it's the reason I'm writing this now. I was in my apartment, late at night, unable to sleep, which has become more common since that job, though I try not to draw a connection. I was lying in bed in the dark, and I heard it. The same tone, low, sustained, at the absolute edge of what I could perceive. It wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't the refrigerator or the heating system or traffic. I know what those things sound like. This was different. This was the sound Hargrove described, the sound I almost heard at the station platform. I got out of bed and walked through my apartment, trying to locate it. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It didn't get louder or softer as I moved from room to room. It was just there, like a pressure, like something leaning against the air. Then it stopped. And in the silence that followed, I noticed something. The wall behind my desk, the wall I sit next to every evening, had a mark on it, a discolored patch, maybe 6 inches across. The paint was intact. The surface was dry, but the color was wrong. It was a shade of gray that was slightly too dark, slightly too absent, and it hadn't been there before. I stared at it for a long time. Then I got a flashlight and looked more closely. The edges were irregular. The shape was difficult to describe. It wasn't a water stain. It wasn't mold. It wasn't a shadow. It was the paint itself, changed. I touched it. It felt the same as the rest of the wall. Same texture. Same temperature. Same temperature. I went to bed. In the morning, I checked the wall again. The mark was still there. I measured it. 6 inches across, roughly 4 inches tall. I wrote down the measurements. I don't know why. Maybe because Hargrove would have written them down. That was 3 weeks ago. I measured the mark again this morning. It's 9 inches across now. I have not told anyone about this. I don't know who I would tell, or what I would say. I scanned some old maintenance logs at a temp job, and now my wall is changing color. I heard a sound that a tunnel inspector heard 20 years ago in an underground passage that's longer than it should be. I found a diagram that showed a place that shouldn't exist, with a word written in it that I can't stop thinking about even though I won't write it down. I know how all of this sounds, but I also know that Hargrove knew how it sounded. He knew, and he wrote it down anyway, carefully, precisely, in the logs that were sealed in boxes and labeled "Do Not Circulate." He documented what he observed because that's what he was trained to do. And then he stopped. And then he wrote entries that said nothing, flat, empty entries with no detail, the kind of entries you write when you've decided that what you're seeing is not something you can put in a report. I think about those last entries a lot. No anomalies observed. After years of documenting anomalies with obsessive care, all systems within normal parameters. After recording a tunnel that grew 70 meters past its own blueprints. What made him stop? What did he see or hear or measure that made him decide the logs were no longer the right place for the truth? And the question I can't stop asking myself, the one that keeps me up at night, listening for that low, steady tone in the walls of my apartment. If the logs were sealed because of what Hargrove wrote in them, why were they still in the building at all? Why not destroy them? Why not shred every page and pretend Tunnel 7 was exactly what the public database says it is? Operational, routine, normal. Unless the logs weren't sealed to hide them from people. Unless they were sealed to keep them in one place. I measured the mark on my wall again tonight, just before I started writing this. It's 11 inches across now. The edges have shifted. The shape is different from yesterday. The word on Hargrove's diagram. The one I said I wouldn't write. It's the same word I found myself whispering this morning, standing in my kitchen, before I was fully awake, before I'd even realized I was speaking. I don't think reading the logs was the problem. I think the logs were the door. And I don't think it closes.